This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber. Today on the show, I talked with prolific game designer and lover of gelatinous cubes, Jammi. It was an absolute pleasure talking with them, and I learned Jammi has written and designed an impressive 40 different games. We sat down on February 11th and chatted about the RPG scene in the Philippines, how deeply personal themes of colonization are to people who've come from colonized countries, and of course, a few of their many games like Balikbayan and Apocalypse Keys. Hi, Jammi. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If you wouldn't mind, can you please tell for our listeners who you are and what you do in the TTRPG space?
Yeah, so I'm Jammi. I use they, them pronouns. And in the TTRPG space, I mainly like to make games, game designer slash game creator slash game person. I work on games as a full-time thing. I'm very lucky to be able to do so. So mainly my life is trying to not come up with new game ideas while trying to work on the ones I have. That's my purgatory, blissful existence. So, but yeah, I'm a game designer. It's super fun.
That's I feel like the same way. Just creative brains. It's like you get an idea and you're like, oh, shiny new, must want. Go do the thing.
Yeah.
So that's
my partner's so used to it. Like I'm in the shower and then he hears me say, no, not a new idea while I'm in the shower. I can't write this down and I have another game to work on. So
I usually ask people, because I'm always interested in people's like origin stories, like their backstory. How did you first like get introduced to role-playing games or TTRPGs?
Yeah, so I think there were like two moments, right? So the first moment was like a failed attempt and they had to try to change the timeline to address it. So the first one was I played Dungeons and Dragons when I was 14 years old, and it was a really bad game. Like it was I played a halfling thief archer person. She was really great, but everybody else at the table, it was just not a fun time, right? Because the party wasn't cohesive. We weren't really doing things together. It was really weird. I was super lost most of the time. The only good thing about that game is we came across a gelatinous cube, which started my long love affair with like gelatinous cubes and puddings and ochre jellies in general. But that's about it, because after that I was like, you know what, I'm never going to try this again. This was a really bad time. I don't know why my friends forced me into this. And so yeah, I was 14, and then it wasn't until like it was almost 10 years later, right? So I was like close to 24, I want to say, right? Because I remember it was like my quarter life crisis or something like that. So oh, wait, my partner is telling me different. He's like giving me signs. 1 second,
Okay,
Mr.
okay.
Editor. You can say it out loud.
Oh, 27.
Okay, I was 27? Are you serious?
Yeah.
No, but I remember...
I'm keeping this in.
We moved out. We moved out together at 27 when you were 27.
We moved out together and I was 27?
Yeah.
I did?
Yeah. Okay, youngest is 26 if it was before December.
Fine. Okay, so I have been corrected. So I was 26 years old, apparently. What's 5 years? And I was 26 years old, and my partner, because we were living with a roommate, and my roommate and my partner had just joined the Star Wars RPG campaign, and I was like, RPGs. Oh, I had a bad time with that. D&D was bad, but Star Wars. So I invited myself to the game, and I was like, I must play the Star Wars. And I was used by the GM technically as like because the poor other PCs thought I was going to be a co-PC with them, and technically I did make a character, and most of them were Jedi. But then the GM introduced me as a Jedi killer. It was really amazing. I love that Twi'lek soldier. I love her so much. So that was really how and ever since that game, it really fired up something inside me. Like I couldn't stop thinking about playing the game. I couldn't stop studying the books. I was dreaming about it, thinking about it every night. And so it's been like that ever since. I've just really, 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 really loved RPGs since that moment.
I have lots of questions. So number one, the D&D game when you were 14, like you said, was it mostly just a the system or the group dynamic that was really the thing that made you have a bad experience? It was like combo?
Yeah. I have to say, I think it was mostly the group dynamics, right? Because we were playing D&D, I think it was like 3.5. I think it was a 3.5 edition. And so later, when I really started getting into gaming, I really got into D&D 4th edition, right? Which is like very different from the edition before and after it. I mean, lots of core elements are there, but there's a huge difference. But I still think like, I don't know, because even as a game designer, I really think the no matter how good a system is, if you don't have a good table, if you don't have people you like playing with, then it's just the game is just gonna crumble and it's not gonna be good. So mostly it was because like there was one dude that didn't want to leave the entrance of the dungeon and was determined to just use diplomacy checks like 13 times in a row to try to
No.
out-talk the skeleton guardian. You know what I mean? While the rest of us were like inside, and it was just bad. And then I was just there shooting the gelatinous cube, bloop, 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 while the two other guys were like, no, we kill this troll, we open the head, we get the skull, and then we use the skill check to create a bomb. And I killed the gelatinous cube by myself, right? Because they took so long.
So actually, that leads me to my second question. What is it about gelatinous cubes?
Oh my gosh, I just love them. I just love the idea. I was just so enamored with the idea of like you could just walk through a corridor in the dungeon and then, oh look, there's the skeleton floating in the air. Why is that? There's a sword that's floating there too. And then if you fail your perception check, you walk right into the gelatinous cube. I just love that idea so much.
That's so funny because it's like, to me, like my first experience with gelatinous cube is really it's like I hated it so much because we had a player who was a minotaur and he was really role playing up his minotaur. Like, I have a low wisdom score, and so he ran in after the pixie, had supplied him with a bunch of expensive armor and all this stuff, and he just dissolved all of his things. So I hate gelatinous cubes.
That's, oh my gosh. I love how they are essentially janitors of the dungeon.
Oh, that's a good, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that's so adorable. I don't know.
like a jellyfish that just a square jellyfish floating through and dissolving all the.
It's true. Just going about their business, just doing the work. I mean, my favorite demon lord in D&D is Drubalex, the basically the slime ochre jelly pudding gelatinous cube demon is my favorite. So
okay, that's fine. You do you. You enjoy what you want to enjoy. I don't like it. It squeaks me out a little bit, but that's okay. So then my next question is then, so I'm in the United States, you're in the Philippines. I have no idea what the like gaming scene is like in the Philippines. Can you kind of talk to me a little bit about that? Because I'm personally interested in knowing what that's like over there.
Yeah. So it's like a fairly small community, but from how I understand it, when we interact with people from like other Asian countries and America, we're also like, despite our size, we're very loud and super, super into it. I guess like that's what people are saying, because yeah, like when people tell me about American conventions for TTRPGs and they say like thousands of people show up, I cannot fathom it, right? I cannot wrap my head around it. Like, I live in Metro Manila, which is like the biggest city here in the Philippines, and we're like millions of people, right? Crammed in this small space. But the most I've seen at our local mini conventions is like, I want to say like a really big one, right? Is like a few hundred or something, like 200. So yeah, and so the idea of thousands of people is like kind of beyond me. But having said that, there are quite like a few people, like of course there are those outside of my events and the circles that I'm in, but yeah, we're super, super into it. Like D&D Adventures League is like very popular here. There are a lot of D&D groups. I think like in terms of like the indie game design space, it's really developing quickly. So like, for example, before the end times, my partner and I had set up a monthly game of Masks because I felt like Masks is a really great introduction to, you know, RPGs beyond D&D, basically, between the Marvel movies, because Filipinos, we love movies. We love the Marvel movies. So, so between that and how much fun the mask system was, I thought that'd be a great introduction. So my partner and I were running like 2 tables a month. And then it was like drop in, drop out. So that was a fun challenge too, trying to figure out how to make masks drop in, drop out friendly. But, you know, people would show up, people would sign up, and then we would get to playing. And we do have regular mini conventions like once a month through Gamers and GMs Philippines. And basically, I feel like even though we're a small group, we are like really, really into it. I think the number of Filipino designers keeps growing exponentially, and we're really active in on Twitter in the RPG scene. So I think like if you compare like, you know, I'm not good at math, ha ha ha, you know, that's kind of why I went towards story games in the first place. but if you look at the percentages, right, of like the number of people who are into RPGs and then the number of people who became game creators, it's quite high, right? So I think that's something that's super, super interesting. And I feel like it's because a lot of us are realizing, I think one of the things that like affects me is a few years ago, I was running Masks and I introduced like an NPC, like we decided it took place in Canada because to our Filipino mind, that sounds like House Science City, right? Canada. I've never been there, but I guess it's like that. To everyone who's Canadian and listening, I apologize. It's just, I don't know why that occurred to us. Anyway, so we set it in Canada. And then so I had a Filipino NPC show up. And then later in the same game session, I had another NPC show up that was also Filipino. And one of my players said, doesn't that seem unrealistic that there are 2 Filipinos, you know? And and I just, you know, it was a moment where my heart cracked, right? Like I felt my whole psyche just crack. I was like, I cannot believe I'm in the Philippines playing a game with my fellow Filipinos. I introduced just 2 Filipino NPCs, and apparently that's too much, right? And that's when I realized, you know, we had swallowed and we had absorbed so much from this Western perspective that we couldn't see ourselves, right? And when we saw ourselves, it was weird to us. And so we were willing to accept a lot of the D&D tropes and a lot of like these store tropes, which come from a Western perspective, right? And then we started to take them into ourselves and believe in them and replace our own like background and our own views with it. And so this is a really tricky process. This is why when I and other creators like me talk about decolonization, it's a very personal thing, right? It's not the same decolonization process that happens in the States, because it's so insidious for us. Like we are caught up in it, and we don't realize, because when he said that and I gave him this look, he didn't even realize he was defending himself. He was like, no, because, and he was saying things like, it's impossible for Filipinos to be like respected and to gain promotions and to get that level, and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Stop! Hold the phone! No! Let's look at this for a second. Why
are you saying these things?
Oh, that breaks my heart too. Gosh.
Yeah. And I think because of that, that's why there's so many of us who want to create in the space now, because we want to make space for ourselves. So I would like to think that it's going to reach out to the people locally so that they can see the different perspectives. I think it's going to be hard to get past some of the, giant 800-pound gorilla D&D-ness that's going, but that's true for any space, right? Not just the Philippines, not just Metro Manila, but I really am proud of where we are and how we're trying to express ourselves and figure out our identities and where we can go from there. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean that's why I'm excited to have you on. I mean, for the listeners who might have listened to some back episodes or who know me or follow me on Twitter, I've talked about how important representation is for me personally. And when I got onto Twitter and I started getting into the indie crowd and I was seeing Filipino designers, creators, role players, I got really excited because as a part Filipino person myself, stuck in the Midwest, I don't have a lot of cultural ties, and it was so fun for me to see, oh, people that are connected to me are making things that I'm excited about, and it's really fun to see. So like you said, Twitter, you guys, I've been following a lot of, and it's been really fun to see the presence showing up, especially for like what you said, like one representation helping to like even the internalized stuff that we've done ourselves, just because of how prevalent Western media is and how we consume it. So cool. So you are one of those Filipino designers. I want to talk about some of the games that you've been making. I have played a few of them, but I'm going to let you, the game designer, choose for yourself which ones and in what order you would like to talk about them.
Ooh, oh my gosh. Okay, so so for people who are listening, I've made a lot of games. I've slowed down in the last few months for various reasons, but when I first came on, I was like joining game jams every month, sometimes more than one a month. So before this recording, I double check how many I have. And like on Itch.io, and it's like close to 40. And then on Patreon, I have a few more that I haven't released yet. So it's a lot of games. But if I was going to choose, oh yeah, which ones to talk about? I think in line with what we were talking about in terms of representation, I'd love to talk about Balikbayan first. So Balikbayan, Returning Home. I wrote that game because I love cyberpunk. I really, really do. I'm more informed by the anime side of it rather than the Western idea. So less William Gibson and more Ghost in the Shell, basically. Less Blade Runner and more Acura. But that being said, the cyberpunk genre for me has always been super interesting because it was looked at as if it was supposed to be a warning, but right now that's no longer true, right? We're kind of like in the thick of it. So right now the cyberpunk genre for me is important because it's a way to navigate what is already here, right? And for us to make sense of it. And I also wanted to like bring in magic because I love Shadowrun as a concept. But playing the game there are a lot of rules. There's a lot to keep track of, right? So, and I just wanted to create a game that really, instead of like creating this barrier, right? Because in Shadowrun, there was this idea like you're more of a magic user or you're more of a tech person, right? And the more tech you have in your body, the more difficult it is for you to use magic. And I didn't like that concept so much, right? I kind of like the idea like, well, why can't we meld the two things, right? And this is a very Western idea, the idea of binaries and separation and less spectrum, right? And it's a more Asian concept to be like, well, but it can be all things at once, can it not? Like just kind of like bringing in these two different ideas. So I first created Balikbayan Returning Home just because I wanted that, and I wanted to center on Filipino folklore because I'm really into that and I really like it. So each of the playbooks are based on different creatures of myth and legend or local folklore. So stuff like the tikbalang, the aswang, and other things. But I also like tapped into other things that feel very Filipino to me. Like one of the playbooks is the Saint, and originally because mostly because of colonization, of course. The Philippines is like a deeply Catholic country. Like everyone assumes you're Catholic. That's how Catholic we are. So every time I tell someone I'm not Catholic, they just kind of freeze up because they don't know what to do in the moment because they're like, someone you can choose to not be Catholic. Like that's how it,
yeah,
how it is here.
Like listener, my grandmother's name is Maria Teresa, and then all of her other sisters are Maria something else.
Yeah. There's so many Marias, and in line with that, most of our goddesses have been renamed Maria by the Spanish, right? So we lost most of their original names, and we can only guess at what their original names were. So, it's just a huge deal. So, so a lot of our myths and legends are about saints and about that connection to God. And so when I created playbooks for Balikbayan, I wanted to reevaluate them and look at them through a different lens. So the saint, for example, instead of being about just the one god, instead the saint is about finding the little gods in the city, right? And I have so much fun every time that playbook comes into play, discussing with the player who are the little gods, what are they the little gods of. And so I just played a game recently on Asians represent where John created the little god of better times. That was actually really interesting. I've also had the little god of masks, the little god of puddles, the little gods of kind lies. Like, it's been really, really fun. And so I took each of those playbooks and tried to, I think it was also, part of like a private decolonization effort. So the Tikbalang, instead of it just being an anthropomorphic horse creature of myth and legend, instead you can change into all the animals, into different mythic versions of the animals. So it's been really fun to do that for each one. And so when I made the game initially, it was just, I just want to have fun. I just want to be cyberpunk and supernatural and magic and cool. I made it like within 2 weeks. I was just typing it.
Oh my gosh.
I was trying to rush for this local convention, right? I was trying to rush for Session Zero, our local convention. That was the first time we were going to have it. And yeah, so I presented it locally, and people thought it was fun and cool, and it was really interesting. But it wasn't until I put Balikbayan online that I really started to realize the potential of Balikbayan, and to realize, because you have a hard time seeing yourself, right, until other people see it. And what I really love about Balikbayan is it gave me the chance to connect to the diaspora, right, to Filipinos who were in the States and in other countries. And because the name alone, Balikbayan, like carries a lot of weight, right? It's a term we use for people who come back to the Philippines, and we call them, yung mga Balikbayan, or the Balikbayan have returned, right? Because it just literally means return home, Balikbayan, right? So one who returned to the homeland is basically what it means. And so it was really interesting to connect to those people and to see the look on their faces, because when I would play the games when I would play Balikbayan with them, I'd see how happy they were and how much they enjoyed connecting to an aspect of themselves. And I realized, wow, this is really, I feel like this is kind of important, even though I mainly made it just to have fun, right? And I think that's when I started to realize as a game designer that there's this interesting Venn diagram that I want to explore, and where my games are fun, hopefully, that's the goal, mainly to have fun, but they can also be a form of expression. They can also be art. They can also be a way to create community. They can also be a way to connect. They can also be a way to recognize people, right? To elevate certain identities, to look at certain forms of marginalization. Like when I was playing Balikbayan, I have some questions in there that make sense to me. And so it wasn't until I was playing with a lot of other people, mostly white people, they were like, oh, this is how capitalism affects us, or oh, this is colonialism, isn't it? And I was like, oh, is it? Like, because to me, I was like, this is just my existence, being colonized is my existence, even though the Philippines is arguably an independent nation, we are caught up in those centuries of being colonized, right? It's something that we can't just recover from, no matter how many years, how many generations we try to. So that's only when I realized it, because they were confused with some of the questions that were built into the setting elements, like, because the idea is you're runaway elementals, you are creatures of magic and machine who are running away from the core pure masters, who have enslaved you. And some of the questions are like, why did you leave people behind? And people were like, well, why did we? Did we have to? And I realized, oh, but to us here in the Philippines, a lot of times people cannot afford to, I want to point out that I'm very privileged, just the fact that I can talk in English, and that I can do these things, that I can work on games. It means I'm part of a privileged group of people for sure. But even that being said, my father had to work abroad a lot of the time, and we were lucky because he would work abroad for 1 month and he would come home for 1 month, back and forth. He was working on an oil rig. But a lot of people here don't even have that. Their fathers and mothers, and parents would leave for like years at a time, not seeing their children. Or they would have to go to another country and not bring most of their family with them, period, right? They would only bring their immediate family, and they couldn't come home for like 10, 15, 20 years, because it was just a way to try to have a better life, because our systems here are so broken that it's so difficult to ensure that everyone has a good life for most people here in the family. And so I was used to the idea like, yeah, you just have to leave people behind. That's just how it is in order to do the best for your family and for each other. And I realized when someone asked that question, I was like, oh, this is not the truth for most people.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing to be struck with because like even I like knowing from my grandmother's experience, it's just like, yeah, she only recently went back to the Philippines after she had been gone for like 40 plus years.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until now with the ability with the internet and stuff that some of her family members can connect with her and talk with her, but 40 years and you write letters and maybe a phone call here and there, but you don't see each other physically, and not until now with the technology. So, if people are lucky to have that technology,
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have so many memories of meeting relatives who are like, don't you remember me? And it's like, it's been 20 years. I'm like, oh, you, like,
who were you again? Which aunt are you?
I was 2 years old the last time I saw you, but yeah, I totally feel that.
So wow, yeah. So putting it on the internet and getting that reception, this wasn't the first game that you made though. This is one of the more recent games that you've put out.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think about it, right? Because like the first few games I made, I very much felt like I was talking to the void. I was just making games, being part of the game jams. I made the games because I wanted to. In fact, like I would try to show the games to people, and I think at the time it just wasn't really taken seriously, even locally. I want to say like you make games because people have been making games locally for like a long time, for years. But I think there is this inherent, we're not really aware of it, right? We're not really conscious of it, but there's this inherent bias of, well, it's not a real game unless it comes from America, right? It's not a real game unless it's been published by someone in America. So, and once again, that's part of our like decolonization process. And like, so for the first few months, like I still think my first game is one of my best, which is my first published game. I have another first game that is only alive on Patreon, and I made a lot of mistakes with that game. One day I will return to it. But the first game I made, Become One, was for the Sad Mecha Jam, that huge game jam that like imploded and a lot of us came from, right? So mine was about the idea is you are the fragmented parts of a mecha AI. And so you used to be one AI and you work with a pilot. So during the war. But the thing is, you crash landed onto a planet and the pilot has barely survived. The AI has fragmented in an effort to keep the pilot alive, to keep the mech running. And so each of the AI fragments has attached itself to memories of the pilots and to the pilot's emotions. So you play these AI fragments. So you are anger, you are fear, you are regret, or you are love. And I'm honestly surprised because it was the first real game. Like I've made some changes, but barely any. And it was one of those weird moments where when I was running it and playing it, I was like, wow, this is a pretty good game. Like this has not always happened. Okay. Like there are times I'm like, this is going to be a great game. And I run it and it's awful. And I'm like, okay, I've learned something, back to the drawing board. But this one is like, yeah, there's always like some form of crying by the end of the game. It gets really, and I think that's what really, I think that's another thing that's important in a lot of my games is I like delving into emotion. I like delving into relationship, and something that's present in all of my games, but especially like super strongly in the first year or so. But even until now, like I'm working on newer games, and this theme still shows up, is memory, because I have temporal lobe epilepsy. And one of the things is, so the seizures look different. Like on the outside, they don't look like much. But on the inside, what happens, especially if I have a bigger seizure, is that it erases memories. And so for the first, I'm not sure, right? I think for the first year, at least, before I got properly diagnosed, I was having seizures and not realizing it. And I was burning through memories. And so I realized when I was working on these games and these experiences that I was drawing from my own. And one of the mechanics in Become One, in the mecha, sad feelings game, is that you can choose to corrupt a memory, or it can be destroyed in an effort to like get a better result, or it may happen as a course of the story. And so it was so strange to me to see other people having these conversations with each other about the nature of the memory, and they would say things that I was really thinking about and struggling with when I came to understand I was losing my memories. They would say things, well, am I going to be the same person if I lose my memories? Like, am I going to connect to someone differently if I lose those memories? And so, I mean, in the years that have passed, for me personally, I feel like losing my memories has helped me realize that I'm still very much the same person, even if I don't remember. It has happened very often with my friends and family where they'll say, that's exactly what you said last time I told you 3 times before. And I'm like, wow, at least I'm consistent. Like, there is no mysterious Jammi that exists without their memories. But it was something that took me a while to come to terms with, and I think the games really helped me see that.
I love that, because I'm thinking too, where it's like, even though we might not remember exact details or what that memory was exactly, but we still have some sort of impression that has informed kind of how we are. So even if we can't remember the details, I love memory stuff too. I just have naturally a bad memory, and so I'm the kind of person that like journals constantly and writes down times and dates and stuff, because I think it's a natural, maybe not the most prevalent fear of a lot of people, but I feel like memory loss is one of those big fears. So that kind of feels good to have a game, or even just you saying like, yeah, I'm still the same person. I just, maybe can't remember exactly things. Near the small village of Heartscrest lies an idyllic hollow abundant with flowers and berry bushes. The warren of Petal Grove is vast and expansive. Hundreds of generations have hopped around its many twisting tunnels. Stories say that this warren has been here since Loam's creation, and all rabbits who inhabit the continent today descended from them. Humans and other various predators come to hunt for rabbits every now and then, nothing out of the ordinary, and until recently, the rabbits of Petal Grove have lived in relative peace. Hello, I'm Amber, the GM of the Warren of Petal Grove. The Warren is a game about intelligent rabbits trying to make the best of a world filled with hazards, predators, and worst of all, other rabbits. I really love the idea of having a game and setting where I plus players could tell several short stories. So I recruited 12 players to play in 3 different mini-stories, all set inside the same Warren. Sessions are aired live on twitch.tv/Geekspective. You can find the VODs on Geekspective's YouTube, and you can find the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Go to geekspective.com for more information. You know what's really hard, but I'm going to do it anyway? Self-promotion. That's right, I'm going to talk about Patreon. Geekspective has one, and if you sign up to become a patron, you'll get access to all sorts of cool Geekspective behind-the-scenes action, like all of my GM prep for Shapeshift and the Warren of Petal Grove, outtakes, drawings, and more! We even have tiers where you can get some sweet swag or play in a game run by me, Amber. Other than sharing our shows, leaving ratings or reviews, this would be an excellent way to help us out at Geekspective. So if you've been enjoying Geekspective shows and want to help us continue to make more and more cool content, go to patreon.com/Geekspective. So you talked about that kind of theme. Are there any other themes that run throughout your large library of 40 plus games that you seem to be drawn to?
I think I'm also always trying to figure out like relationships, emotions, like those are very important to me. I think like with my latest game the latest biggest game I'm working on, Apocalypse Keys. So it's my first like full-sized, powered by the apocalypse, big kahuna game. Like it's really huge. Like I've dabbled with PPD before then, but this is like, okay, this is it. All those other games I've worked on have helped me get to this point. And so a lot of the strong themes of relationships and found family and connection are really there. But when I look back at my other games, it's really this. I always want to encourage people to define themselves based on the relationships they have, because I feel like that's very true for me, like who I am as a person. And this is also a very Filipino Asian concept, right? Like, you are not an individual. You are made up of all the people around you. You are made up of the people who love you. You're made up of the people who support you. Is a very true thing. And so I try, when I make games, because I was about to say I try to put that in my games. I don't think I do. I think it just naturally comes out. And I think another big theme that keeps coming up is definitely colonialism or the act of decolonization. And this one really surprised me, because even though I'm aware of the effects of colonialism on my culture, on my country, on myself, I didn't think it was something that was really burdening me. I didn't realize it until I was making the games, and it just kept coming out over and over again. I think the first example was Their Love Destroyed This Land, and the idea of the game jam was just make a map making game that takes place across ages. And I was like, sure. And then the game that came out, so it's like a tarot prompt game, map making game. But the game that came out was, there was once this beautiful, pristine land of magic, and these well-meaning invaders came in and destroyed it with their love for each other, and then left us to fend for ourselves. And we never recovered from it. And the game just goes through that process, right? And so, and when I play test that game, when I play this game with people who are not Filipino, or people who don't come from like colonized experiences, like it's a very moving game and they enjoy it. But when I play it with people who have that background of like generational trying to recover from generations of colonization and stuff, people really like stop, like this has happened to us, like we are still recovering from, because like you end up playing as like you are these gods that have been, will you tell the story again, will you remember the story the same way, and there's that memory theme again coming up. But yeah, like, and I think one of my favorite things was someone who played the game took a video of themselves talking about it, and he said, I was so determined to try to force a happy ending, but I couldn't do it. I had to be honest to the story and to the effects of colonization. And then he was crying while eating a sandwich. It was just very moving for me. Like, I saved that video. I was like, I have made it as a game designer. I made someone cry while eating a sandwich. Like, I just feel like that's a milestone.
That's a huge milestone. Well, I actually say it just hits different. I think it's so interesting because I feel like that's just, like you said, you don't realize this about yourself until you, I think earlier you said until you reflected back, right? Like through another person or by another person's experience. You're like, oh no, what does this mean? Oh, what have I been thinking about unconsciously all this time? What have I been processing? I think it's really interesting because I've talked about it before on this show. I love RPGs as a form of self-discovery, as a form of processing. Like sometimes you don't even realize you're doing it, right? And so I think for you, obviously, and in the games you're designing, that processing of stuff is coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. I really absolutely think so. And like, I think also like it relates to, so there's this thing called, there's a kind of game that a lot of people like to make an itch.io, and they have in hindsight been called ritual games, right? Or lyric games is what people call them. And so, and sometimes people ask me, so Jammi, because you make lyric games, what are lyric games? I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. I just make games. And other people call them a lyric game afterwards, and I have no idea. But basically, so I'm going to say right now as a disclaimer that lyric games and ritual games mean very different things to different game creators. But to me, when I do that, it really is, because any game you make is an expression of creativity, is art of some kind. But I think when I personally make a ritual game or a lyric game, I'm putting expression first. I'm putting art first, for the lack of a better term, but art as expression, right? And so, but a lot of it, what's really interesting is because before I became a full-time game creator person thing, I was a full-time tarot reader and professional psychic and Reiki shaman. I'm still a Reiki shaman. I'm still all those things, but it's no longer what I do mainly from day to day on a professional capacity. But a lot of what I did, especially when I was leading shamanic journeys or when I was doing tarot readings for people, they show up in the game now, right? So one of those is a game called Soul Quest, which is basically like a shamanic journey for one person. I did that, except you use cards and you draw it out on a map. But when I was writing the game, I didn't think. I was just like typing it out, and it just came, which is why when you read the game, it's very much, it sounds kind of stream of consciousness. And I'm always talking to the person on a very intimate level, because I believe even in a solo game, even in a game where there's only one person playing, I don't think you really play it alone. I think you play it with the creator. So every time I write a game, even if I think only one person is playing it, I really talk to them like, I'm here with you, experiencing the game with you. I want you to take care of yourself. I want you to set aside this time for it to be ritual for whatever you need. And another game I made is Tea with Demons, which is based on what I used to do with my clients when they had to sit down with their anxieties and their fears and their worries, and we would give these worries and fears and anxieties like names, like they become these demons that we would interact with, that we would sit and have tea with to help process through these things. And so it was me like experimenting and opening myself up to the idea of like drawing from that experience of being a Reiki shaman and putting it into games as well. And I'm really happy that it's also resonated with people.
I know RPGs. I've mentioned this before again on another episode where, you know, RPGs aren't therapy. They're not a replacement for therapy, but I think they are very therapeutic in nature, or can be very therapeutic in nature. And I feel like I'm trying to like put words together right now to express these big thoughts in my head that I don't have these tiny little words for, where I feel, I don't know, I think my journey into games has changed too, where it used to be very much video game style. I'm not really thinking I'm just here to hack and slash, get those gelatinous cubes, whatever.
Yeah.
And then over time you're like, oh wait, it's the story side. And then also we can, as a means of like guided sort of meditation. And I've seen more and more of these now coming out in the indie space, and I'm interested to know why you think that's happening.
Well, a lot of us have different theories, but what I've heard from people that really makes sense to me is a lot of indie creators in the space, we are marginalized identities, right? So we are marginalized genders, or we're people of color. And I think because of that, we have gone through a lot of trauma, right? And we have gone through a lot of difficulty, and we're trying to make sense of ourselves. I think actually one of the biggest things is I only realized I was non-binary because of interacting with the TTRPG space. So before that, I was under the illusion like that I was a cis woman, and it just, saying it now is but, and it wasn't until I was like interacting with a lot of people who were non-binary, and also interacting with their games, which really delved into that on a ritualistic lyric perspective, that made me realize, you know what, I'm not actually a woman, right? And so I think a lot of us, because we've had to learn how to work towards healing ourselves and healing each other and trying to help each other and supporting each other while being there for ourselves, it shows up naturally in the games as well, because we live in a world where there are these systems in place that do not support us, and most of the time don't even recognize us, don't even see us. And so I think that's where it comes from. And when I heard other people talk along those lines, I felt like, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you, right? Like, games are not a replacement for therapy, but I think therapy is also not just within therapy, right? Like it's an ongoing process. And I think games can help support that process for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
You don't just go to therapy, you get a check mark on your therapy card and it's all done.
Yeah.
No, you have to keep doing things and working at stuff. God dang these human brains. Why can't I just get my check mark and be done? No, I must now go through life practicing things. I say this, of course, all
Yeah.
kidding, all joking and sarcastic, because I that's why I think I like seeing these games, because I think people do think that trauma and mental health, it can be solved by, you know, I did my therapy time, I did my medicines, and then I should be cured. And I'm like, no, it's something you have to live with and will deal with for the rest of your life. And so it's nice to have these tools or games, because humans love play, right? It's perfect. It's like a nice ongoing tool to have at your disposal in a game form.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. And like, I think part of the reason why I started like delving into lyric games and those kind of games is because there really is very little difference in terms of format, in terms of structure between ritual and game, right? So when you play a game, one of us is the GM or all of us are the GM. This is the role that we play. This is what's expected of us. These are the rules. We have to say certain things to activate certain other aspects. And ritual and magic is kind of the same thing. It was interesting to me when I drew more upon my experiences, because like when I was working as a professional psychic and tarot reader, I would work with psychologists and psychiatrists a lot. Like we would like interact. I would have clients show up and I'm like, you know what? I'm looking at this reading and I'm listening to your angels. I have a specific like psychiatrist that you should like go see. Or sometimes the opposite would happen, where they would go see a psychiatrist and the psychiatrist would be like, yeah, I think you should also see Jammi. And so like that would like interact with each other. And so it's just really, okay, so this is like another Filipino thing, right? Where we see magic and we see the supernatural and we see this far more easily. Like everyone here has like at least 10 friends who supposedly have a third eye open, right? They can just naturally see ghosts, like no big deal. Like, you know, like it's just very normal here. Everybody has their own ghost stories or brushes with the supernatural. I used to be a really huge skeptic because I'm actually a third culture kid. Grew up in Singapore and my dad is Algerian and my family is like ridiculously practical. Like my mom would talk about how religion and God was created to control the masses and the poor when I was like 10 years old. And then when I came home with the paper writing that same thing, she was like, where did you get this from? Didn't I raise you to be a God-fearing child? I was like, no, Mom, you did not. Okay, I had to remind you, you didn't. But anyway, that's like the Filipino, like, we're very much like that, right? We're like this chaotic, like mess of things. And so it's just easier for us to accept the ideas of ritual and game, magic and life and like, you know, healing and stuff. It's all like interconnected.
I was gonna say, like, I'm pretty I'm very skeptical. I like the idea of stuff, and I think in my mind, if people believe things and it's helping them through stuff, I'm not gonna deny that for them. And especially if it's not hurting anybody and is doing more good, then go for it. I'm happy for you, and I'm glad that you have that belief. But man, and especially, like I said, especially if it's helping. So speaking of helping, how about you, Jammi? Can you help us find you on the internet and where your games are at and anything that you want to talk about as far as promotion and stuff going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me mainly on Twitter at Temporal Hiccup and on itch.io at Temporal Hiccup 2. And so, but Twitter is like the best way to keep track of me because I've been really lucky enough to be a co-host of the Gauntlet podcast and also to get on stream sometimes as a player or as a GM. So the best way to keep track of all of that is on Twitter when and where I talk about it. But you can also find me on Patreon in case you have the means and you're interested in supporting me. Like I said, this is my full-time gig and my patrons help me pay the bills. So you can find me at patreon.com/SwordQueenGames.
Awesome, thanks. Well, this was a lovely chat. I'm so glad that we could get to talk with each other.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Amber. This is such a blast.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at Rocket Orca, Kenny as at Volfmir, and John is at Crossways GM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards.